AI or machine learning or blockchain, how much of that did they create? How much of that have they stolen from the West? Do you have a sense for those?
Well, I think, again, those aren't the only two possibilities. I think I don't think they created very much. I think a lot of it was just handed over from the West, so it was not even stolen. I criticized Google a few years ago for refusing to work on its AI technology on Project Maven with the U.S. military, but working with Chinese universities and Chinese researchers. And since everything in China is sort of a civilian-military fusion, Google was effectively working with the Chinese military, not with the American military. And there's sort of this question: why was Google doing this? And one of the things that I sort of was told by some of the insiders at Google was they figured, they might as well give the technology out through the front door, because if they didn't give it, it would get stolen anyway. So it doesn't quite count as theft, but it's quasi-theft.
Co-opted, yes.
Question, which I think there's a consensus now that AI and quantum computing are the new high grounds, or at least will be the high grounds for the future. And I think there's still a consensus that we have an edge in both those areas.
Yes.
Although again, it's a diminished edge over where it was a few years back. What's your advice to the Biden administration? How do we stay ahead on quantum and AI? Keeping in mind that we're an open society and we've got all these graduate students here and that sort of thing. What do we need to do to stay in the forefront? Because my concern is if we fall behind, we lose the high ground. We're going to be in for a rough spell.
Yeah, the thing that I would say is tricky about AI is that there are a lot of aspects of the technology that I think we don't actually want to be pursuing too much, because it's AI is what you need for a surveillance society. Right. I've had this riff where people often say crypto or Bitcoin is a vaguely libertarian technology. I mean, technology is politically neutral, but it can still be. Crypto's sort of, if crypto is kind of libertarian, then AI is kind of communist. And so even though we're ahead from the basic science of AI, China is willing to apply it. It's willing to turn the entire society into a face recognition surveillance state that's far more intrusive, far more totalitarian than even Stalinist Russia was. And that's something we're not willing to do. Big companies are better at doing things at scale. Small companies are better at innovating. And to the extent that we need to innovate, you need to figure out a way for a slightly larger fraction of the pie to go to startup companies, mid-sized companies, new companies with technologies, and there has to be a way for it to be an integrated procurement where you can get a pilot, and then there's a pathway for, if the pilot works, for it to scale rapidly and get adopted rapidly. The sort of opposite version of that we have now is that you can only deploy things where you've been buying something from a customer for a decade or something, and you have these sort of chicken and egg type rules, which mean that no new person can ever break in. And the big defense primes have in many ways gotten to be a little bit more sclerotic, less innovative over time, and it's very hard to correct that. But that would be the thing I would zero in on. There obviously are just all these different areas where we have set programs on, like, building more aircraft carriers. Maybe we should be doing less of, and we should be doing more in innovative new areas, and that's always very hard to do because the set programs have a constituency around them. You can't disrupt that easily. So when you have a growing defense budget, you probably have more room for innovation. One of the worries I have is that the defense budget will probably not grow that much in the next few years, and then these innovation challenges are going to be much harder. And we'll have the risk is that we have a repeat of what happened at the end of the Cold War, where the budgets got cut but the innovation got cut a lot more. You can think of big tech as something that's very natural. It's unnaturally big, it's unhealthy, it's too strong, but there's something in the nature of tech to be big. Big science is actually an oxymoron, and it's like if you have a science factory, or if you have some sort of giant science, some giant science factory, there's probably not very much science going on at all. And so yes, I think probably there's a whole bunch of things on the basic R&D side where it could be reconfigured in some way that's much better, and then how you do that politically is, again, very hard lift. I think the thing I would say is we have to just keep putting a certain amount of pressure on Silicon Valley, and we need to call companies like Google out on working on AI with China, with communist China, and not with the U.S. military. I think we should be putting a lot of pressure on Apple with its whole labor force supply chain on the iPhone manufacturing in China, and so I think that's that's one way we sort of do a little bit of what Robert was talking about earlier, where you sort of there's obviously some crazy double standard where labor laws don't apply there, but they do apply here, and there are all sorts of crazy double standards, and you just need to call people out on that relentlessly. I think the cybersecurity issue is is simply a mess as far as I can tell, where there's basically the basic problem is that cyber is one of these places where offense works a lot better than defense, and I don't quite know what you do. I'm often amazed. I sort of assume that so much stuff has been hacked into in one way or another. I'm sort of amazed the stuff doesn't get used in more ways. It's like people should be getting blackmailed, bribed. All sorts of crazy things should be going on all over the place, and somehow, all the data that I assume has actually already been exfiltrated. It's actually weird. It doesn't get used more. I don't even know why that is. But my model is that cyber is just a disaster, and it's actually amazing that it doesn't manifest itself more. I guess my sort of pro-innovation bias is always that people are somehow too anchored on the past, and in business they're too anchored on doing things that worked in the past or copying some model that building a new search engine was the right thing to do for Google in 1999. It's probably not the right thing to do today because it's very hard to compete against Google by doing the exact same thing they're doing. And then I think the foreign policy mistake that I suspect gets made a great deal and over again is to somehow think that we're still at some point in the past. And so maybe one version of the mistake that was made with China was to think that it was going to be like the Soviet Union, and then the Berlin Wall came down in '89, and then surely something like that was going to happen in China. We're sort of anchored on the 1980s and used that as a frame, and then of course it's a dynamic thing where China can also look at the history and read the history and say, well, that's exactly what's not going to happen. We're going to have perestroika but no glasnost, and we can sort of also innovate in certain ways and avoid that. And then there's sort of a version where it's like, well, is this like 1914 or is this is this 1989 or what year is this? And I always say it's actually just 2021, and that's not very helpful, but maybe that's where we should start.
I want to thank our special guest, Peter Thiel, and our co-chairman, Ambassador O'Brien, Secretary Pompeo, and the 15 members of the seminar. Thank you.